Imagine the ground beneath your feet still warm from the day, even though night has already begun to settle. Air that smells faintly of river water and crushed reeds. Darkness not as silence, but as movement crickets, distant splashes, the soft shuffle of bare feet on damp earth. A world where the sky feels closer, heavier, like it's leaning in to watch you. Tonight we're going to drift slowly through the entire story of ancient Mesopotamia, the place where humanity, without realizing it, quietly began becoming what it still is. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from and what your local time is right now. Somewhere out there, other people are doing the same thing. That matters more than it sounds. You are not standing in a famous place yet. No monuments, no names, no borders, just land caught between two rivers that don't behave themselves. Some years they creep politely. Other years they arrive angry, wide, and unstoppable. The floods don't ask permission. They don't care about effort. They leave behind both destruction and a gift thick, dark soil that clings to your feet when you walk. For thousands of years, humans pass through this region and move on. They hunt, they gather, they follow seasons the way animals do. Nothing about this feels revolutionary. Survival is personal, immediate, exhausting. You live day to day, meal to meal, without imagining a future that stretches very far ahead. And then, slowly, almost accidentally, something shifts. Someone notices that seeds dropped near the river grow back. Someone else realizes that returning to the same place works better than constant movement. No announcement is made. No council votes. Nobody says, "This is the moment humanity changes forever." That's not how real change works. It arrives disguised as convenience. Staying put feels easier. At first, permanence is fragile. Shelters are temporary. Food is still uncertain. But familiarity grows. You learn the river's moods. You learn which plants survive floods and which drown. You learn patience not as a virtue, but as a necessity. Waiting becomes productive. This is where a quiet, scholarly debate lives, one that historians still circle gently. Did agriculture create civilization? Or did the desire for stability create agriculture? There's no final answer, and that uncertainty is important. It reminds you that the people here weren't marching toward destiny, they were improvising. You wake each morning to the same horizon. That repetition changes how your mind works. When you stay, you start planning. When you plan, you start storing. And when you store, you create something new without meaning to surplus. Surplus is dangerous. Extra grain means extra time. Extra time means thinking. And thinking has consequences. Someone has to guard the food. Someone has to distribute it. Someone has to decide who gets more and who gets less. The moment grain lasts longer than hunger, power quietly enters the room. No one calls it power yet. Villages begin to form not because people are ambitious, but because cooperation beats isolation. Mud bricks replace temporary shelters. Fires become shared. Tasks divide naturally. One person shapes tools better. Another remembers flood patterns. Another talks well enough that people listen. Leadership doesn't arrive wearing a crown. It arrives wearing usefulness. There's a quirky detail archaeologists still smile about. Some of the earliest evidence of settled life includes surprisingly elaborate cosmetic tools, pigments, mirrors, and what might be the world's first skincare experiments, including mineral pastes mixed with animal fat. Civilization didn't start because people wanted to be efficient. It started because people wanted to live and look better. As villages grow, memory starts to strain. Oral tradition can only stretch so far. Who owes grain to whom? Which family contributed labor last season? Who offended which god? And how badly? Arguments appear not because people are worse than before, but because there's now something to argue over. The land between the rivers becomes crowded with intention. You feel it in the air, the sense that life is no longer just happening to people. People are shaping it back. The rivers remain unpredictable. Floods still arrive without warning. Some years they save you, some years they ruin everything. You don't understand weather patterns yet, but you understand fear. And fear looks for explanations. That's when gods begin to take clearer shape. Not abstract, gentle forces, but personalities. Hungry ones, moody ones. Gods who flood fields when displeased, and retreat when properly honored. Temples rise not as places of peace, but as negotiation centers. If the river is alive, someone must be speaking for it. Priests become specialists in uncertainty. This isn't blind superstition. It's risk management with rituals instead of spreadsheets. When you don't control nature, you try to influence it socially. Offerings feel logical when randomness is terrifying. And here's another ongoing debate historians still whisper about. Did religion stabilize early societies, or did it justify inequality once it appeared? Again, no clean answer. Probably both. Probably neither alone. What matters is that belief systems start doing administrative work. As populations swell, villages press against their own limits. Paths harden into roads. Shared spaces turn permanent. Storage buildings multiply. And then, one place crosses an invisible threshold. It becomes a city. Uruk isn't famous yet. It doesn't know it will be remembered. It's loud, crowded, messy, and alive. People arrive from surrounding villages because cities solve problems villages can't at the cost of creating entirely new ones. Noise never stops. Waste accumulates. Disputes multiply. You can't know everyone anymore. That anonymity changes behavior. Rules must become visible. Authority must feel solid. This is where humanity tries something new. Abstraction. Instead of remembering everything, you mark it. At first, marks are simple scratches representing quantities. Grain counts. Livestock tallies. Accounting comes before storytelling. Numbers learn to exist before words do. Writing is born not from poetry, but from bureaucracy. Clay tablets dry in the sun, holding tiny impressions made by reed styluses. No one reading them feels inspired. They feel relieved. Memory no longer has to carry everything alone. And once information can outlive a person, civilization stops depending entirely on individual minds. There's a soft irony here. The first written complaints we've ever found are about bad copper deliveries and unfair transactions. Even at the beginning of history, someone is unsatisfied with customer service. Humanity wastes no time staying consistent. Cities grow taller. Temples rise higher. Authority thickens. And slowly, a new role appears, someone who doesn't just manage resources or rituals, but commands obedience. The king. Early kings aren't divine yet. They're practical. They lead irrigation projects. They organize defense. They settle disputes too complex for families to handle. But the position hardens quickly. Once authority becomes inherited, hierarchy stops being temporary. The distance between ruler and ruled becomes real. Yet for ordinary people, daily life remains grounded. You wake, you work, You eat bread coarse with grit from stone mills. You worry about floods, pests, and illness. You tell stories at night that blend memory with hope. Civilization doesn't feel grand when you're inside it. It feels busy, and that might be the most important thing to remember. Ancient Mesopotamia doesn't explode into existence. It accumulates layer by layer, choice by choice, convenience by convenience, until one day humanity looks around and realizes it's living inside something it never meant to build. A system, and systems, once alive, do not like to stay small. The rivers keep flowing, the land keeps giving, and the experiment continues, unaware of how far it will stretch or how heavy it will become. You can almost feel the night deepen now, the sounds softening, the edges of thought rounding off. This is only the beginning. You're still here, between the rivers, but now you notice something you didn't before. The problem with extra grain is that it doesn't stay neutral for long. At first, surplus feels like relief, a cushion, a promise that one bad season won't erase everything you've built. Storage rooms fill with sacks and jars. Doors are sealed with clay. Marks are pressed into tablets to remember what sits where. Hunger loosens its grip, just a little, and that small relief changes behavior. You notice it in pacing. People stop rushing through days as if tomorrow might not exist. Plans stretch further ahead. Repairs are scheduled instead of improvised. Children are trained not just to survive, but to contribute later. The land isn't neutral. It isn't kind or cruel on a schedule. It's inconsistent, and that inconsistency shapes everything. The Tigris and the Euphrates don't behave like polite rivers. They don't rise gently every year the way the Nile does. Sometimes they swell early, sometimes late. Sometimes they surge with violence, tearing through fields just as crops are ready. Other times, they retreat too quickly, leaving cracked earth and thirst behind. You can never fully trust them. And because you can't trust them, you watch them. This watching becomes a skill, a shared one. People begin to remember patterns, clouds in the north, snowmelt timing in distant mountains they've never seen, subtle changes in current speed. Knowledge becomes local and precious. Not everyone has it. Not everyone needs it. But everyone depends on it. Here's where geography quietly becomes destiny. This land, flat and open, offers no natural walls, no mountains to hide behind, no forests thick enough to disappear into. Anyone can arrive. Anyone can leave. Trade flows easily, but so does trouble. You are exposed, always visible, always reachable. That openness encourages connection. Stone, metal, and timber aren't plentiful here, so they must come from elsewhere. In return, grain flows outward. Boats begin to slide along the rivers, carrying goods and ideas together. You don't just trade objects, you trade habits, myths, techniques, and fears. Civilization starts cross-pollinating, but openness also demands cooperation on a scale humans haven't tested yet. Irrigation canals must be dug and maintained. Embankments repaired after floods. One family can't manage that alone. Even one village struggles, so coordination becomes survival. This is where authority stops being optional. Someone must decide where canals go. Someone must organize labor. Someone must enforce participation, because opting out threatens everyone. If one section collapses, fields downstream suffer. Collective systems punish individual neglect. And this is where another scholarly debate lives, quietly unresolved. Were early Mesopotamian states cooperative networks that hardened over time, or coercive structures from the very beginning? The evidence points in both directions. Probably because reality was messy. People don't experience the state, they experience pressure, expectations, obligations that feel heavier each year. Yet there's comfort in predictability. Canals bring water where rain won't, fields expand, surplus grows, population thickens. Life becomes harder in some ways, easier in others. Hunger becomes seasonal instead of constant. Risk becomes managed instead of random. You start to measure time differently. Days matter now. So do seasons. So do years. Calendars emerge not from curiosity, but necessity. You need to know when to plant, when to harvest, when to prepare for floods. The sky becomes a tool. Stars stop being decoration and start being reference points. Astronomy begins as scheduling. There's a fringe tidbit that still makes historians pause. Some early star groupings recorded here don't match later constellations at all, suggesting entire sky maps were abandoned when they stopped being useful for agriculture. Even the heavens were edited for practicality. As coordination deepens, so does tension. Fields border fields. Water access becomes political. A diverted canal upstream can starve those downstream. Disputes sharpen. Words aren't always enough anymore. Conflict doesn't arrive suddenly. It seeps in through resentment. Weapons improve incrementally. Not dramatic leaps, just better blades, stronger shafts, tighter formations. Defense structures rise around settlements. Walls don't just keep enemies out. They define who belongs inside. Inside becomes an identity. You begin to see yourself as part of a place, not just a family. That mental shift is enormous. Loyalty stretches beyond blood. Shared fate replaces shared ancestry. And with that, the idea of us solidifies. Rituals reinforce it. Festivals timed to agricultural cycles bind people emotionally to the land. Stories explain why this place matters, why these rivers chose you. Myths don't just entertain, they justify belonging. Gods become local specialists. One controls floods, another fertility, another war. Divine portfolios mirror human anxieties. Temples grow wealthier, not just spiritually but economically. Offerings accumulate. Storage rooms fill. Priests manage resources alongside meaning. Religion and administration blur. At night, as fires flicker, stories stretch longer. Elders speak of earlier floods, earlier famines, earlier recoveries. Memory becomes instruction. Survival becomes tradition. And beneath it all, the rivers keep moving, unconcerned with human effort. You start to sense that living here is a negotiation with time itself. Every improvement demands maintenance. Every solution introduces a new vulnerability. Irrigation salinizes soil over decades. Fields slowly lose productivity. Short-term abundance carries long-term cost. But that future problem feels distant. Right now, the land is alive with possibility. The systems are working. The experiment is holding. You fall asleep to the sound of water moving through channels you helped dig, trusting that tomorrow it will still be there. And for now it is. You've been staying longer now, long enough that the idea of leaving feels strange. Movement used to define safety. If food ran out, you moved. If danger came, you moved. But here, between these rivers, movement has slowly turned into risk. You've invested too much in this place. Fields cleared, canals dug, walls repaired. Leaving would mean abandoning effort, and effort has weight. So you stay, Staying changes how you look at the land. You don't just see what it gives today, you see what it might give next season. You imagine outcomes, you gamble on time. This is the quiet moment when humans stop reacting and start anticipating. Your day begins earlier now, not because someone orders you to, but because schedules exist. Fields don't wait. Water doesn't wait. You measure mornings by light angles and evenings by fatigue instead of hunger. Tools become extensions of your hands, hoes polished smooth by repetition, baskets shaped exactly for grain. There's comfort in routine, but also pressure. If you miss a planting window, the loss isn't theoretical. It's real, and it echoes forward. Children grow up knowing tasks instead of terrain. They learn canal paths before animal tracks. They understand boundaries before horizons. Their world is smaller in distance, larger in obligation. And that's a trade-off no one formally agrees to. Villages expand into each other. Paths intersect. Shared wells become meeting points and friction points. Disputes aren't rare anymore. They're expected. Someone encroaches. Someone diverts water. Someone remembers an agreement differently. At first, elders mediate. Memory still matters. Reputation still works. But memory gets crowded. Too many people, too many past promises, too many versions of what really happened. So authority starts to formalize, not out of ambition, but exhaustion. People want decisions to stick. They want closure. Rules begin to harden. You notice it in small things. Certain paths are restricted. Certain days are reserved. Certain spaces belong to the temple, not the community. What was once flexible becomes fixed. Not because flexibility is bad, but because stability feels safer. And this is where an important psychological shift occurs. People begin to accept inequality as functional. Some people don't farm, some don't build, some don't fight. They organize, interpret, or oversee. Their work is invisible, but its influence spreads everywhere. At first, this feels efficient. Later, it feels inevitable. Surplus feeds specialization. You see craftsmen emerge, potters whose vessels don't leak, weavers whose cloth lasts longer, metal workers whose tools hold an edge. Skill becomes currency. Identity becomes profession. Names start carrying expectations. Trade deepens these distinctions. Goods arrive from far away, stone from mountains, metals from distant hills, shells from coasts you've never seen. You hold objects shaped by hands you'll never meet. The world expands without you moving, and with trade comes comparison. You notice other settlements doing things differently. Some organize better, some worship differently, some grow richer faster. Competition isn't declared, it's observed. Quietly, rivalry forms. Defense becomes more intentional, not because war is constant, but because loss would be catastrophic. Walls thicken, lookouts appear. Weapons are stored rather than improvised. Training becomes routine. Here's a fringe detail that still surprises archaeologists. Some early defensive structures were built before clear evidence of organized warfare, suggesting fear of conflict may have preceded conflict itself. Preparation created the expectation of threat. Fear shapes architecture. And still, life goes on. You celebrate births, you mourn losses, you complain about heat and insects and unreliable tools. You argue about fairness, you gossip about leaders. Civilization doesn't feel sacred from the inside, it feels crowded. Religion adapts to this density. Gods become more specific, rituals become more regular, calendars align spiritual duties with agricultural ones. Sacred time overlays practical time. There's comfort in believing someone is in charge, even if that someone isn't human. Priests grow influential because they claim access to explanations. Why the flood came early, why the crop failed, why disease moved through the settlement. Even uncertainty feels easier when it has a narrative. This is another scholarly tension historians still discuss. Did belief systems reduce anxiety or redirect blame away from leadership? Again, probably both. Human systems rarely do just one thing. As obligations multiply, so do records. Clay tablets stack higher, storage rooms fill with information as much as grain. Accounting expands now, tracking labor, offerings, penalties. Writing grows slowly, awkwardly. It's not elegant yet. It's functional. Symbols stand in for things, actions, names. The idea that marks can represent reality takes time to feel normal. But once it does, memory is no longer fragile. And once memory is external, power can extend beyond presence. Orders travel. Decisions outlive their makers. Authority detaches from personality and attaches to position. You begin to feel it that the place itself is becoming more important than the people inside it. That's both reassuring and unsettling, because places don't sleep. They don't forget. They don't forgive easily. As night settles again, you lie listening to water move through channels you didn't dig yourself, trusting systems maintained by people you don't know personally. Your life depends on strangers, behaving predictably. That's new, and once that dependence exists, there's no easy way back. Belonging doesn't arrive with ceremony. It creeps in quietly. Through repetition, you start to recognize faces you don't know personally, but trust anyway. The potter whose jars never crack. The canal supervisor who notices leaks before they flood fields. The priest whose voice sounds steady even when the river doesn't behave. Familiar strangers become part of the background of your life, and that familiarity feels like safety. Homes change shape. What were once temporary shelters harden into rectangular rooms with defined corners. Walls thicken, roofs improve. Space becomes something you own, not just occupy. You begin to care about boundaries, not because you're greedy, but because investment demands protection. Mud bricks stack neatly now, sun-dried and uniform. Streets form unintentionally at first, worn by footsteps, then deliberately, cleared and maintained. Waste is pushed outward, order inches inward. The village exhales and becomes something denser. You notice sound differently. The constant hum of human activity replaces the silence of open land. Tools strike stone. Animals call from enclosures. Voices overlap. The night never goes fully quiet anymore. There is always someone awake. Somewhere. That shared noise is comforting. Families grow closer together physically, but farther apart socially. You don't rely solely on relatives now. Neighbors matter. Reputation matters. Your behavior echoes beyond your household. One mistake can ripple outward. So, norms tighten. Certain behaviors are expected. Certain times are respected. There's an unspoken rhythm to daily life. When to work, when to rest, when to gather. Deviating from it draws attention, and attention isn't always kind. Children absorb these patterns without question. They learn what is normal simply by watching. In doing so, they inherit systems they didn't choose. This is how culture solidifies. You start to notice roles passed down rather than discovered. A potter's child becomes a potter. A scribe's apprentice learns symbols before strength. Opportunity narrows quietly, not by law yet, but by expectation. It feels efficient. It also feels limiting. Food is more reliable now, but it's not evenly distributed. Some households store more. Some live closer to temples. Some have better access to water. Differences that once fluctuated now persist. Inequality becomes visible, and with visibility comes justification. People explain differences as divine favor, personal merit, or ancestral blessing. These explanations soothe discomfort. They make imbalance feel natural. Here's a subtle but important detail. Early temple complexes often doubled as storage centers, redistributing food during shortages, but they also decided who qualified for help. Charity and control shared the same building. Power learns to wear kindness. Festivals grow more elaborate. They mark planting seasons, harvests, and divine anniversaries. Music, drink, and shared meals temporarily erase hierarchy. For a moment, everyone belongs equally. And then the moment passes, work resumes, roles reassert themselves, order returns, trade deepens further. You see goods that carry stories, stone carved with unfamiliar styles, metals shaped with techniques you don't recognize. Each object is proof that other worlds exist, structured differently, worshipping different gods. But you don't envy them. You feel anchored here. This place has weight now. Leaving would mean stepping out of a shared narrative that gives your life coherence. That's the real power of settlement. As population grows, disputes grow sharper, not louder, sharper. People understand what they're defending now. Land isn't abstract, it's inherited. Water rights aren't flexible, they're survival, so mediation formalizes. Elders gather more often, decisions are remembered longer, penalties become standardized. Justice stops being personal and starts becoming procedural. This is the slow birth of law, long before it's carved into stone. Writing expands to keep up, symbols multiply, meanings stabilize. Scribes become indispensable, not because they're wise, but because they remember for everyone else. Their marks carry authority. Here's a quirky detail buried in the tablets. Scribal training was brutal. Students copied the same signs endlessly, and surviving practice tablets include complaints, insults, and even what look like early doodles born of boredom. Civilization advanced on the backs of very tired students. As records grow, leadership changes shape. Decisions don't need to be spoken directly anymore. They can be sent, orders travel, influence stretches. You begin to feel governed even when no one is present. And yet, life feels fuller than before. Predictable, structured, busy in a way that keeps fear at bay. You know where you belong, even if you don't always like it. As night returns, lamps glow in doorways. The settlement hums softly. You fall asleep, knowing that tomorrow will look much like today. That sameness feels like progress. You don't realize yet that growth has a cost, or that soon the place you belong to will start asking more from you than you ever planned to give. Time becomes something you manage, but surplus also attracts attention. Someone must watch it. Someone must decide how it's used, when it's released, who gets access. Those decisions feel temporary, at first practical responses to immediate needs. Then they harden. Guarding grain becomes a role. Managing distribution becomes authority. Recording quantities becomes power. The difference between holding food and deciding food is thinner than it looks. You begin to feel it when shortages hit unevenly, when one household eats well and another tightens belts, when explanations replace solutions, when phrases like necessary and for the greater good start appearing in conversations. Surplus teaches people how to justify control. Work changes too. Not everyone needs to farm anymore. Some people organize labor, some supervise construction, some interpret omens, some keep records. Their hands stay clean while others blister. At first, this division feels logical. Everyone benefits, right? But logic doesn't erase resentment. You overhear complaints, quiet ones, spoken at night, about who works hardest, about who decides most, about who benefits least. These aren't revolutionary thoughts, they're tired ones. Hierarchy doesn't arrive violently, it settles in like dust. You see it in clothing quality, in housing placement, in who stands closest to temple steps, in who speaks first during gatherings. None of this is announced, it's observed. And once observed, it's remembered. Here's a scholarly tension historians still wrestle with. Did inequality emerge because some people seized power, or because communities willingly traded equality for stability? The evidence suggests both happened at once, feeding each other. Stability is seductive. With surplus, large projects become possible. Bigger canals, stronger walls, taller temples. These require coordination beyond family units. Labor is organized in shifts. Absence is punished. Participation becomes expected, not requested. The city begins to feel like an obligation. You wake earlier now, not because you want to, but because schedules demand it. Someone is counting labor days. Someone is tracking output. Someone is measuring contribution. And measurement changes how people see themselves. You are no longer just a person. You are a unit of work. This abstraction is subtle, but powerful. When contribution becomes numeric, empathy becomes optional. Systems function best when they don't pause for individual stories. Religion absorbs some of the tension. Gods are credited with abundance. Shortages are blamed on displeasure. Offerings increase during hardship. Faith becomes a pressure valve. Priests benefit from this arrangement, but so does everyone else, at least emotionally. Blaming divine will hurt less than blaming neighbors. Here's a fringe detail tucked into temple records. Some offerings lists spike dramatically after poor harvests, suggesting people gave more precisely when they had less. Fear is generous. As power concentrates, leadership shifts tone. Early leaders persuade, later ones command. The difference is felt, even if it's not named. Punishments become standardized, not cruel yet predictable. Fines, labor penalties, public correction. The goal isn't suffering, it's compliance. And compliance works. You adjust. Everyone does. You learn when to speak and when not to, which rules bend and which don't. Survival now depends less on nature and more on navigation, social, political, religious. That's a new kind of intelligence. The city thrives outwardly. Trade expands. Influence grows. Others want what you have. Grain, textiles, techniques. You feel pride in this. Proof that staying was the right choice. But beneath the success, soil quietly changes. Irrigation leaves salt behind. Fields require more effort for the same yield. No one panics. The effect is slow. Slow problems are easy to ignore. At night, you lie awake sometimes, listening to the city breathe. You think about how much depends on things staying exactly as they are. Surplus created comfort. Comfort created structure. Structure created power, and power, once it exists, never stops asking to be used. The city doesn't announce when it becomes something new, it just feels different one morning. Uruk is no longer a cluster of homes gathered around shared needs. It's a presence. You sense it before you see it. The hum of activity, the density of people, the smell of baked clay and refuse layered together. Paths have turned into streets. Open spaces have names. Movement is directed rather than improvised. You don't know everyone here anymore. That realization lands quietly, but it changes how you behave. You lock doors, you keep track of tools, you assume strangers instead of relatives. Trust becomes selective. This is the psychological threshold of a true city. Work becomes specialized at scale. Entire neighborhoods focus on particular crafts. Noise patterns differ by area: metal, striking metal, looms tapping rhythmically, animals shifting in enclosed spaces. The city sounds segmented, and above it all, the temple rises, not just as a place of worship, but as an anchor. It's visible from nearly everywhere, reminding you where authority lives. Its steps are worn smooth by thousands of feet. Its storage rooms are vast, its walls thick. The gods live here, but so does administration. Priests manage labor schedules, offerings, and redistribution. They interpret omens and record transactions. They mediate disputes and advise leaders. Their power is both spiritual and logistical. Here's a quirky but telling detail. Some of the earliest beer production we know of happened under temple supervision. Rations were sometimes paid in beer, not as luxury, but as nourishment. Civilization literally ran on fermented grain. As Uruk expands, writing evolves, symbols multiply, grammar begins to emerge. Writing starts representing sounds, not just objects. Language learns to exist on clay. This changes everything. Orders no longer need to be spoken in person. Agreements can be stored. Laws can persist. Authority gains memory. Scribes gain status. Their ability to capture reality in marks feels almost magical. They sit apart from manual labor, hands soft, posture careful. Their mistakes matter. Education appears not broadly, but intentionally. Literacy is controlled. Knowledge is power, and power doesn't like to be shared casually. Trade intensifies. Boats arrive daily, goods stack high, markets buzz with negotiation, prices fluctuate, value becomes abstract. A sack of grain isn't just food, it's exchange potential. You start thinking in. This mental shift is subtle but profound. Once everything can be compared, everything can be measured, and once measured, everything can be managed. Leadership adapts. Kingship emerges more clearly now, not just as coordination, but command. The king represents stability, protection, continuity. He claims divine favor, not because he believes it personally, but because belief makes obedience smoother. Rule becomes symbolic. Monuments rise bearing names. Victories are recorded. Contributions are celebrated selectively. History starts being written by those with access to writing. Here's another scholarly debate, whispered across centuries. Were early kings administrators who later claimed divinity, or divine figures who learned to administer? The archaeological record supports both interpretations, depending on where you look. Reality, again, refuses simplicity. As Uruk's influence grows, tension with neighboring cities grows too. Resources overlap, trade routes intersect, pride hardens, competition sharpens. Diplomacy exists, but it's fragile. You feel it when strangers arrive in larger groups, when defenses are tested more frequently, when military organization becomes routine rather than reactive. War, when it comes, isn't constant, but its possibility shapes everything. Walls thicken. Training formalizes. Young men are selected, equipped, prepared. Here's a fringe observation. Early Mesopotamian warfare focused less on total destruction and more on control, seizing resources, asserting dominance, collecting tribute. Annihilation wasn't efficient. Cities learned to threaten rather than erase. Daily life continues amid this tension. You eat, you work, you celebrate, you worry. Civilization doesn't pause. For fear, it absorbs it. At night, you look up at the temple silhouetted against the stars. You feel small, but also protected, part of something enormous and purposeful. Uruk is awake now, and once a city wakes, it doesn't sleep easily again. The marks on clay don't look impressive at first. Small wedges, lines pressed by reed tips. They don't try to be beautiful. They try to be accurate. Accuracy is the new virtue. At the beginning, these marks are only meant to remember things humans keep forgetting: how much grain came in, how much went out, who delivered it, who still owes. Writing doesn't arrive as expression. It arrives as relief. Someone no longer has to argue about memory when clay remembers better. You watch scribes work, seated cross-legged, tablets balanced on their thighs. Their hands move with practiced economy. No flourish, no hesitation. Each mark carries weight. Mistakes aren't erased easily. Wet clay forgives briefly. Dried clay does not. That permanence changes how people behave. Promises feel heavier when they can outlive you. Lies become riskier. Authority becomes less personal and more official. A decision written down stops being a suggestion. This is when writing quietly steps beyond accounting. Names appear, not nicknames, not descriptions. Formal identifiers tied to obligations and roles. To be named in writing is to exist differently. You're no longer just known, you're recorded. And once people can be recorded, they can be categorized. Lists grow longer, categories multiply: worker, priest, farmer, dependent, outsider. Writing organizes the world into columns. Complexity becomes manageable when it's flattened onto clay. Here's a strange but revealing tidbit. Some early tablets include practice sentences that translate loosely to insults and scoldings. Scribal students copying phrases like, "You are lazy," or "Your work is poor." Even education needed discipline, and discipline needed language. As writing matures, it starts capturing sounds, not just things. Words become portable. Stories become stable. Myths stop drifting with memory and start settling into shape. The gods gain consistency. Their personalities sharpen. Their demands formalize. Rituals standardize. When belief is written, deviation becomes visible. Orthodoxy becomes possible. And orthodoxy brings power. Priests can now point to tablets and say, "This is how it's done." Disagreement shifts from interpretation to defiance. The divine becomes bureaucratic. There's a scholarly argument still alive here. Did writing strengthen religion by preserving it, or weaken it by freezing what was once fluid? Both outcomes seem true. Flexibility fades, authority increases. Law begins to take recognizable form, not yet carved into stone, but recorded in tablets, penalties, procedures, expectations. Justice stops being negotiated case by case and starts following patterns. Predictability replaces mercy. People adjust quickly. Knowing the punishment makes risk calculable. You weigh actions against consequences instead of emotions. This is civilization teaching itself restraint. Trade benefits enormously. Contracts are written, deliveries tracked, debts remembered beyond a season. Trust expands beyond personal relationships. You can trade with someone you've never met because clay will remember if they don't keep their word. The city's reach stretches, but writing also sharpens inequality. Literacy remains rare. Most people depend on intermediaries to represent them. That dependency creates vulnerability. Whoever controls the pen controls reality. You feel this when disputes are recorded differently than remembered, when official versions don't match lived ones, when power speaks in marks you can't read. Resentment grows quietly. Still, writing feels miraculous. It allows the dead to speak. Orders from long-gone leaders still shape daily life. Time bends. The past stays active. At night, you hear scribes still working by lamplight, scratching softly into clay while the city sleeps. Their work never ends, because civilization doesn't pause. Once gods are written down, they stop being vague. Before, belief drifted like the river, flexible, local, personal. A household might honor one spirit more than another. A village might tell the same story slightly differently each year. Variation wasn't a problem, it was normal. But now the gods have addresses. They live in temples with schedules, inventories, and staff. Their names are standardized, their preferences recorded, their anger anticipated. Worship becomes procedural. You don't just believe anymore, you participate correctly. Temples grow heavier, not just physically, but socially. They store grain, tools, records, and offerings. They employ laborers, scribes, musicians, guards. They manage festivals that coordinate entire populations at once. Religion becomes infrastructure. You feel its influence daily. Work pauses for rituals. Resources flow towards sanctuaries. Decisions are delayed until omens are read. The divine calendar overlays the agricultural one, doubling obligations. And yet the system works. When floods come unexpectedly, rituals provide explanation. When crops fail, sacrifices offer a sense of response. Anxiety becomes manageable when it's shared and structured. This is the quiet genius of early Mesopotamian religion. It turns uncertainty into routine. Gods aren't gentle. They're demanding, moody, competitive, much like the humans who imagined them. Each city favors its own divine patrons. Loyalty to a god mirrors loyalty to a place. Belief reinforces borders. Here's a fringe detail that still intrigues scholars. Some gods rise in importance only after their cities gain political power, suggesting divine hierarchies sometimes followed human ones rather than leading them. Heaven reorganized itself to match earth. As temples accumulate wealth, priests gain leverage. They interpret signs no one else can read. They speak for gods no one else hears directly. Their authority rests on knowledge, ritual precision, and access to writing, but it's a delicate balance. If floods continue despite offerings, faith strains. If rituals fail repeatedly, trust erodes. Priests must adapt interpretations carefully, never blaming gods outright, never admitting uncertainty too openly. They become masters of explanation. Kings notice this skill. Political authority and religious authority begin to overlap. Leaders align themselves with temples. They fund construction, sponsor rituals, claim divine favor, In return, gods endorse rule. Power learns to speak sacred language. You see this during festivals. Kings appear beside statues. Priests speak blessings over leaders. Crowds watch, absorbing the message without needing it spelled out. Order is divinely approved, but not everyone benefits equally. Temples decide who receives aid during shortages, whose offerings are worthy, whose sins require correction. Moral authority becomes social control. Still, most people accept it. The alternative, randomness without meaning, is worse. At home, daily rituals become smaller echoes of temple ones. Offerings at doorways, short prayers before work, tiny habits meant to keep chaos at bay. Belief moves into routine. As night deepens, temple lamps glow long after homes darken. You fall asleep knowing someone is awake, speaking to the gods on your behalf. That knowledge feels comforting and dangerous, because once gods are embedded into systems of power, questioning either one begins to feel like treason. Somewhere along the way, leadership stops feeling temporary. Early authority felt like a role you stepped into when needed, organizing labor, settling disputes, leading during crisis. But now, leadership settles into the body. It stays when the emergency passes. It expects to remain. Kings begin to occupy the space between gods and people. Not fully divine yet, but not ordinary either. Their words carry weight, even when nothing urgent is happening. Their presence alone shifts behavior. People straighten, conversations quiet, expectations adjust. You notice that decisions no longer require consensus. They require acknowledgement. The king doesn't farm, doesn't dig canals, doesn't shape tools, and yet his influence touches every one of those tasks. He coordinates, commands, symbolizes. His job is to embody the city itself, to be the human shape of order. That symbolism matters more than strength. Crowns aren't elaborate yet. Regalia is simple, but rituals surround leadership. Public appearances are staged. Victories are celebrated loudly. Failures are explained carefully. Kings learn early that narrative is power. Here's a scholarly argument that never quite resolves. Did kingship arise to protect cities from chaos, or to protect elites from the people? Archaeology suggests both motivations overlap so tightly they're hard to separate. Protection always comes with conditions. As authority consolidates, distance grows. Leaders stop living among everyone else. Palaces emerge, not necessarily luxurious at first, but distinct. Space becomes political. Access becomes privilege. You feel this distance when disputes are no longer heard directly, when intermediaries appear, when outcomes feel predetermined. Yet kings also bring stability. They mobilize armies, they negotiate with rivals, they sponsor temples. They coordinate massive projects that no family or priesthood could manage alone. Walls rise higher, canals stretch farther, trade routes secure under armed oversight. People sleep easier knowing someone is in charge. But control has a price. Military organization sharpens. Soldiers train regularly now. Weapons standardize. Defense becomes proactive rather than reactive. Young men are counted, equipped, drilled. War stops being an accident. City rivalries intensify. Borders harden. Tribute replaces trade in some places. Influence is measured not just in goods, but in obedience. Here's a fringe observation buried in early records. Victories are exaggerated, losses minimized, and neutral outcomes reframed as divine tests. History becomes selective almost immediately. Kings don't just rule the present, they curate the past. Daily life adjusts around this reality. Taxes appear not always in coin or grain, but in labor days. Obligations stack. Participation is no longer optional. Refusal carries consequences. And still people adapt. You learn how to exist within the system, when to comply fully, when to push gently, when to disappear into routine. Survival now requires social intelligence as much as physical effort. The king stands between you and chaos, or so the story goes. At night, palace lamps glow alongside temple ones, two centers of gravity pulling at the same city. Divine order and human command overlapping, sometimes aligning, sometimes competing. You sense that something irreversible has happened. Authority has learned how to stay. Rivalry doesn't arrive with shouting. It arrives with comparison. You notice it first in markets. Another city's grain is cheaper. Another city's metalwork is sharper. Another city's gods seem to be answering prayers more reliably. Pride stirs not loud enough to start a fight, but strong enough to make people remember. City-states begin to watch each other more closely. Messengers travel faster. Alliances form, loosen, reform. Trade routes double as intelligence lines. A visitor is never just a visitor anymore. Every arrival carries possibility, opportunity, or threat. You feel this tension in how gates are guarded, how questions are asked, how hospitality becomes cautious. War, when it happens, isn't constant, but it's intentional, it's seasonal, calculated. Raids target fields, not just walls. Capturing surplus matters more than burning cities. Victory is measured in leverage. This is not yet annihilation, it's dominance. And then something new happens. One city doesn't just win, it keeps winning. Leadership stretches beyond its natural borders. Tribute flows inward. Local rulers remain, but they answer upward now. A single authority begins stitching together what used to be separate worlds. This is where the idea of empire quietly steps into the room. You hear the name Sargon of Akkad spoken with a mix of awe and uncertainty, not because he's invincible, but because he's persistent. He doesn't rule just one city, he rules cities. The Akkadian Empire doesn't erase local identities immediately, it overlays them. Local gods remain, local customs survive, but ultimate loyalty shifts. Distance becomes a problem to solve. Administration adapts. Governors are appointed. Garrisons installed. Communication networks stretch. Writing becomes essential at scale. Orders must travel. Reports must return. You feel the weight of something larger pressing down. Empires aren't just big cities. They're systems designed to function across difference. Language barriers, cultural friction, regional resentment, all must be managed. And management is exhausting. Here's a scholarly tension historians still circle. Did the Akkadian Empire succeed because it unified diverse regions, or fail because it tried to? Evidence supports both interpretations. From inside, it feels impressive. Roads are safer, trade flows farther, resources pool. The world feels connected, but cracks form early. Local elites resent oversight. Distant regions feel neglected. Armies are stretched thin. Loyalty weakens the farther it travels from the center. Still, for a moment, it works. You live inside a network bigger than anything before. News arrives from far away. Goods appear that once felt mythical. The horizon expands without you moving. And yet, something feels fragile. Empires depend on constant motion of goods, of soldiers, of authority. When movement slows, everything strains. Climate shifts, droughts, stress, agriculture, rebellions flicker, administration buckles under its own weight. Collapse doesn't come with a single blow. It comes as fatigue. Records thin, maintenance slips, trust erodes, the center can't respond fast enough, the edges pull away, and then, quietly, the empire dissolves back into fragments. Cities remain, people remain, knowledge remains. But the illusion that one authority can hold everything together forever fades. You lie awake at night, sensing that scale has limits, that bigger isn't always stronger, and that the experiment of empire, once attempted, will never truly be forgotten. After the empire loosens its grip, something interesting happens. Life doesn't collapse into chaos. It keeps moving almost stubbornly so. Cities adjust. Authority shrinks back into familiar shapes. Local rulers reassert themselves. And through all of it, the habits learned during expansion don't disappear. They settle. This is how invention becomes routine. The wheel is no longer remarkable. It's expected. Boats move along canals with practiced ease. Sails catch wind without ceremony. Tools improve not because someone announces progress, but because repetition demands refinement. You don't think of these things as innovations anymore. They're just how things are done. That's the moment technology truly wins. Timekeeping tightens. Days are divided more carefully. Work shifts are measured. Rest becomes scheduled. The idea that time itself can be organized sinks deep into daily life. You wake not just with the sun, but with obligation. Mathematics grows quietly alongside this need. Counting becomes calculation. Measurement standardizes. Geometry emerges not from curiosity, but from land disputes, construction angles, and canal gradients. Knowledge doesn't spread evenly. It concentrates where it's useful, where it supports power. Here's a fringe detail historians love. Many mathematical tablets include solved problems with no explanation, just answers suggesting learning was more about copying correct outcomes than understanding why they worked. Practicality beat theory every time. Medicine follows a similar path. Illness is treated through a blend of observation, tradition, and belief. Symptoms are recorded, remedies repeated. Some treatments help, some don't, but patterns are noticed. Healing becomes professionalized. You trust certain people with your body the way you trust scribes with memory and priests with fate. Specialization deepens dependency, and dependency reinforces structure. Architecture advances too. Buildings grow taller, stronger, more planned. Cities develop skylines not impressive by modern standards, but intentional. Space is used strategically. Walls curve to deflect pressure. Drainage is considered. These aren't aesthetic choices. They're survival lessons learned the hard way. Unification always sounds cleaner than it feels. After centuries of learning how to live side by side, how to trade without collapsing, how to fight without erasing one another, someone finally asks a dangerous question. What if chaos could be managed from one place? That idea doesn't appear as ambition. It appears as fatigue. Too many rivalries, too many border skirmishes, too many disruptions to trade and harvest. Unity promises relief. One law, one authority, one direction. And that's how the Akkadian experiment begins to feel inevitable rather than aggressive. When Sargon of Akkad rises, he doesn't just conquer, he reframes. He presents domination as order. Cities are no longer rivals, they are components. Differences are tolerated, but hierarchy is enforced. From the inside, it feels stabilizing. Roads are safer, messengers travel faster, trade flows with fewer interruptions. You hear news from places you've never seen, delivered in familiar administrative language. The world shrinks, even as it grows, but unity demands standardization. Language begins to shift. Akkadian spreads across tablets and administration, gradually edging out local tongues in official contexts. You still speak your dialect at home, but power speaks another language now. That distance matters. Governors arrive, appointed, not chosen. They carry authority borrowed from far away. Their loyalty points upward, not outward. They're efficient, but unfamiliar. Decisions feel correct on paper and wrong in practice. You adapt anyway. Empires reward compliance. Resistance is costly. Most people learn to exist quietly within the new structure. They follow rules they didn't help create. They pay taxes they don't fully understand. They adjust expectations, and still, life goes on. Here's a scholarly debate that refuses to settle. Did the Akkadian Empire collapse because it grew too large to manage, or because environmental stress pushed fragile systems past their limits? Climate records hint at prolonged drought. Archaeology shows administrative strain. The truth likely sits in the overlap. Empires magnify stress. When harvests fail locally, the system absorbs it until failures align across regions. Then, coordination becomes liability. Centralized response slows. Resources move inefficiently. Blame travels faster than aid. You feel this as delay. Orders arrive late. Supplies miss seasons. Garrisons thin. Trust weakens. And once trust weakens, loyalty follows. Rebellions flicker, not as unified movements, but as refusals. Cities drag their feet. Governors cut corners. Soldiers desert. The system doesn't shatter. It frays. Here's a strange, almost poetic detail. During this period, curse inscriptions become more common tablets, calling down divine punishment on enemies. When control weakens, words turn sharper. Eventually, the center can't hold. Akkad doesn't fall in flames. It dissolves. Authority retreats. Cities reclaim autonomy. Local gods regain prominence. Old patterns reassert themselves, now shaped by imperial memory. People don't celebrate, they adjust. The idea of empire doesn't disappear with Akkad's decline. It lingers, proven possible, proven dangerous, proven tempting. Once someone has imagined the world unified, that imagination never quite goes away. You sense it in conversations, in expectations, in quiet comparisons between past order and present freedom. When the weight lifts, you feel it immediately, but you can't quite name it. After Akkad loosens its hold, the air feels less compressed. Decisions happen closer to home again. Authority speaks in familiar accents. Rituals sound like they used to. The world doesn't suddenly become fair or gentle, but it becomes legible. That matters. Empires promise clarity through scale. What they deliver, often, is distance. When that distance shrinks, daily life regains texture. Problems are smaller, but they're yours. Solutions are imperfect, but they're local. Cities breathe differently now. They repair what was neglected. Canals are patched where they matter most. Walls are maintained with care rather than ambition. Trade resumes along older routes, guided by trust, rebuilt person by person, and still nothing returns to how it was. Once you've lived inside something vast, your sense of normal changes. You expect coordination, you expect records, you expect authority to persist beyond personalities. Those expectations don't vanish with the empire. They settle into habit. This is how collapse reshapes rather than erases. New dynasties rise, quieter at first. Leaders present themselves as restorers, not conquerors. They promise continuity of gods, of customs, of justice. Innovation is framed as return. It's a familiar trick, and it works. Here's a scholarly tension that runs through this era. Was Mesopotamia experiencing a true decline, or simply a rebalancing after overreach? Archaeological layers suggest both contraction and adaptation. Some cities shrink, others thrive. Civilization doesn't move in straight lines. It redistributes. You notice increased emphasis on law and order, not grand proclamations, but everyday enforcement. Predictability becomes precious after uncertainty. People crave rules that stick, which is why law begins to crystallize. Customs that once relied on memory are written more deliberately now. Penalties are clarified, procedures standardized. The idea takes hold that fairness means consistency, not compassion. This shift feels cold, but it's stabilizing. Trade grows again, cautiously. Merchants hedge risk. Contracts multiply. Insurance-like practices emerge. Shared risk, pooled resources. People get better at surviving volatility. You feel pride returning, not in domination, but in resilience. At the same time, the environment keeps changing. Irrigation's long shadow lengthens. Salt builds in soil. Some fields are abandoned. New areas are cleared. Populations shift. The land teaches limits. Belief adapts too. Gods remain powerful, but their narratives soften. Divine anger explains less. Human responsibility explains more. Rituals persist, but expectations adjust. Religion becomes slightly less about control, slightly more about comfort. At night, you lie awake listening to the city, not the roar of expansion, but the steady hum of maintenance. Civilization has moved from invention to endurance, and endurance, while less glamorous, is harder because it requires restraint. The lesson of empire lingers like a scar proof of what scale can do and what it costs. Leaders, remember it. People, remember it. Memory becomes policy. The world hasn't stopped changing. It has learned to slow itself down. Nothing dramatic announces the unraveling. That's what surprises you most. There's no single disaster you can point to and say, this is when it ended. No final battle that clears the air. No great fire that erases the past. Instead, things just slip. Maintenance is delayed. A canal wall that should have been repaired last season waits another. A grain store leaks a little longer than it should. A tablet goes unwritten because the scribe is sick or tired or reassigned. Each decision makes sense on its own. Together they add up. You start hearing the same phrases more often. Next year, after the harvest, when things settle down, time stretches, urgency softens. The systems that once demanded constant attention begin to tolerate neglect. That tolerance is dangerous. Empires, cities, even villages survive on momentum. When that momentum slows, gravity takes over. The structures don't collapse outward. They sag inward. People adjust without panic. They always do. Labor is redistributed, rituals are simplified, expectations are lowered. What once felt temporary becomes normal. This is how decline hides itself. Here's a scholarly phrase historians use carefully: gradual systemic failure. It sounds technical, but it's deeply human. It means no one person caused it. No single decision broke everything. The system simply became too complex to care for perfectly, and perfection was never optional. Environmental stress adds pressure. Drier seasons arrive more often. Floods behave unpredictably. Salinity creeps further into fields that once produced reliably. Yields drop. Not enough to cause famine, just enough to strain margins. Margins matter. When surplus shrinks, tolerance shrinks with it. Disputes sharpen. Blame circulates. People look for causes, and causes look for faces. Leadership responds with reassurance, with ritual, with enforcement. Sometimes all three at once. But confidence doesn't refill granaries. Authority can't command rain. You feel the shift in tone. Less ambition, more preservation, fewer new projects, more focus on holding what exists. Civilization turns defensive. Trade thins. Long-distance routes feel riskier. Merchants hedge closer to home. Ideas travel more slowly. Innovation pauses not because people stop thinking, but because change feels expensive. There's a quiet irony here. The very systems that once protected people from uncertainty now amplify it. When everything is interconnected, weakness spreads. And yet, life continues. Children are born, songs are sung, bread is baked. People adapt their expectations downward and call it realism. You still wake up, still work, still belong to something. That's what makes collapse so hard to see from inside. You don't experience it as an ending. You experience it as adjustment. At night, the city is quieter now. Fewer lamps stay lit. Fewer scribes work late. The hum hasn't stopped, but it's thinner. You fall asleep, not fearing disaster, but sensing absence. Something that used to be there isn't, and you can't quite remember when it left. When memory starts to feel unreliable, people reach for stone. Custom works well when everyone remembers it the same way, but as generations stack up, memory bends, stories shift, exceptions multiply. What was once obvious becomes arguable. That's when law stops being flexible. You don't notice the change all at once. It appears in tone. Decisions sound firmer. Penalties feel less negotiable. The phrase, "this is how it's done," gains weight. Not because it's persuasive, but because it's final. Rules are no longer suggestions shaped by context. They are expectations shaped by precedent. Writing plays a central role here again. Tablets accumulate, judgments are recorded, outcomes are compared, patterns emerge. Someone notices that consistency feels fairer than mercy. Predictability reduces conflict even if it feels harsh. This is the logic that gives birth to formal law. Not justice as kindness, but justice as structure. You feel the shift when disputes end faster, when arguments are cut short by reference rather than discussion, when the outcome matters less than the process. And then, one day, law becomes public, carved, displayed, visible to everyone. The message is clear. Ignorance is no longer an excuse. Rules exist outside individual relationships now. They belong to the city itself. This is where Hammurabi enters the story, not as a sudden reformer, but as the embodiment of a long process already underway. His laws don't invent justice, they standardize it. The Code of Hammurabi feels strict because it is. Punishments are specific, consequences unequal, status matters, harm is measured differently depending on who suffers it. From a distance, it feels brutal. From inside, it feels stabilizing. You know what happens if a contract is broken. You know the cost of negligence. You know where you stand, literally and legally. That clarity reduces conflict, even as it enshrines inequality. Here's the scholarly debate that never rests. Did written law protect the weak by restraining the powerful, or protect the powerful by formalizing their advantage? The answer, again, is both. Law limits arbitrary violence while preserving hierarchy. Civilization learns to compromise with itself. Daily life adapts quickly. People plan with penalties in mind. Risk becomes calculable. Social behavior tightens. Reputation matters more than ever because written records remember longer than forgiveness. You watch craftsmen adjust standards. Builders follow rules more carefully. Merchants document transactions obsessively. Everyone learns to live within lines drawn by someone else. The law doesn't make people moral. It makes them cautious. Religion supports this shift. Gods are presented as endorsers of order. Kings rule by divine mandate. Obedience becomes sacred. Disobedience becomes not just illegal, but impious. The system reinforces itself beautifully. At night, as lamps flicker against carved stone, you feel a strange comfort. The world is harsh, but it is legible. You can navigate it if you pay attention. That feeling of harsh clarity is seductive, and it will echo far beyond Mesopotamia. Order, once written down, wants a center. That center becomes Babylon. It doesn't rise overnight. It gathers gravity slowly, the way deep water pulls without splashing. Trade routes bend toward it. Legal authority echoes outward from it. People speak its name the way they speak of stability as something you can lean on. Babylon learns an important lesson earlier than most cities. Control doesn't have to be loud. It organizes rather than intimidates. It codifies rather than improvises. Law becomes its language. Administration becomes its personality. The city doesn't demand loyalty through spectacle alone. It earns compliance through predictability. You feel this in daily life. Contracts are honored more often. Disputes resolve faster. Taxes feel structured instead of arbitrary. The system isn't gentle, but it's consistent. Consistency builds trust. Merchants prefer Babylonian oversight. Artisans value its standards. Farmers accept its demands because outcomes feel fairer than chance. You don't love the rules, but you can plan around them. That ability to plan is power. Kings here don't rely solely on divine mystery. They rely on order. They present themselves as guardians of balance between gods and people, rich and poor, chaos and routine. It's a careful performance, rehearsed daily. Here's a fringe detail that still fascinates historians. Babylonian scribes were obsessed with symmetry not just in writing, but in city planning, legal phrasing, even cosmology. Balance wasn't aesthetic, it was moral. The city's influence spreads quietly. Neighboring regions adopt Babylonian legal practices. Administrative language travels with traders. Even rivals copy its methods. Babylon becomes a template. Religion adapts again. Gods are still powerful, but their narratives emphasize justice over wrath. Moral cause and effect gains prominence. The universe itself is imagined as ordered, measurable, intelligible, governed by principles. Astronomy thrives here, not as wonder, but as regulation. Stars mark time. Time structures ritual. Ritual stabilizes society. Knowledge becomes cumulative. You notice scholars arguing more politely, carefully about interpretations. Debate exists, but within boundaries. Questioning is allowed. Undermining is not. This balance feels mature, but maturity carries a hidden risk. Rigidity. As Babylon's system proves successful, it resists change. Innovation slows unless necessity demands it. Tradition hardens. The past becomes reference, then authority. And authority rarely enjoys being challenged. Still, for a long stretch, the city works. It absorbs shocks. It outlasts rivals. It becomes a place people migrate toward rather than flee. At night, you sleep under laws you didn't write, gods you didn't choose, and systems older than your grandparents. And somehow, that feels reassuring, because predictability, once tasted, is hard to give up. For most people, history never feels like history. It feels like errands. You wake before the heat thickens, because work done early hurts less. Bread is coarse, sometimes gritty, with stone dust from the mill. Water is precious enough that you don't waste it washing hands unless there's a reason. Clothing is practical, patched, repaired more than replaced. Life is not poetic. It is managed. You measure days by tasks completed, not ideas explored. Fields need tending. Animals need feeding. Tools need sharpening. Children need watching. Elders need listening to, partly out of respect, partly because memory still matters, even with tablets everywhere. Homes are small but purposeful. Rooms serve multiple roles. Privacy is rare, but community is constant. Someone is always nearby, always watching, always aware. That awareness shapes behavior. Marriage is practical before it is romantic. It binds families, stabilizes labor, secures inheritance. Love exists, but it's not the organizing principle. Survival is. Children are valued not sentimentally, but structurally. They are the future workforce, the continuation of obligation. You don't raise them to be free. You raise them to fit. Religion threads through everything, but quietly. Short prayers before work, small offerings at doorways. You don't expect miracles. You hope for stability. The gods are powerful, but distant. Appeasing them feels wiser than questioning them. Illness is common. Injury is frequent. Medicine helps sometimes. Other times it doesn't. You learn to accept uncertainty without surrendering to it. Pain is managed, not dramatized. Music exists, but not constantly. Stories are told at night, often repeating the same epics with slight variations. Repetition comforts. Familiar endings reassure. Here's a detail archaeologists still smile at. Some household inventories include toys, small figurines, balls, miniature carts. Even in structured societies, play refuses to disappear. Markets are loud and tense. Bargaining is expected. Everyone assumes exaggeration. Trust is negotiated in real time. Coins aren't common yet. Value is measured by weight, volume, promise. You become fluent in estimation. Social status is visible, but not always fixed. A bad season can humble anyone. A good contract can elevate someone briefly, but mobility is limited. The system allows movement at the margins, not transformation. Slavery exists, but it's not uniform. Some enslaved people are prisoners of war, others are debtors. Their lives are constrained, but not erased. They work, marry, worship. Freedom is possible but rare. This complexity makes moral judgment difficult. Nothing fits neatly. Festivals punctuate the year. They reset emotional balance. Music, drink, shared meals hierarchy softens temporarily. For a moment, the system breathes. Then it tightens again. You learn how to exist inside it without breaking, how to comply without surrendering entirely, how to find meaning in small routines. Civilization isn't heroic here, it's functional. And that functionality, imperfect, exhausting, stabilizing, is what allows everything else to exist. At night, you lie down knowing tomorrow will demand much the same. There's comfort in that, and a quiet fear of what might happen if it doesn't. Efficiency changes the mood of power. Where Babylon learned to rule through order and predictability, another force grows by perfecting something colder control. You feel the difference immediately. The tone shifts, the edges sharpen. The Assyrian Empire doesn't apologize for authority. It doesn't soften rules with reassurance. It streamlines domination until it works almost automatically. This isn't chaos, it's precision. Armies are no longer seasonal or symbolic. They are permanent, trained, standardized. Equipment is uniform, commands are drilled. Movement is coordinated with a level of discipline that feels unsettling if you've lived through looser systems. Fear becomes a tool, not accidental, but engineered. You hear stories before you see soldiers, stories of cities that resisted and paid dearly, stories that travel faster than armies themselves. By the time troops arrive, resistance has already been negotiated internally. Here's a scholarly phrase often used carefully: psychological warfare. The Assyrians don't invent violence, but they systematize reputation. Terror is cheaper than prolonged conflict, and it works. Administration mirrors the military. Provinces are organized efficiently. Governors are monitored. Rebellions are punished quickly and publicly. Populations are relocated deliberately, breaking local identities and reducing resistance. Displacement becomes policy. From inside the empire, life feels oddly stable. Roads are secure, trade flows. Law is enforced swiftly. You know exactly where the line is and what happens if you cross it. Clarity replaces comfort. Here's a fringe detail tucked into Assyrian records. Some kings kept detailed notes on campaign logistics, water access, marching speed, terrain difficulty. War becomes data-driven. Violence becomes bureaucratic. Culture adapts. Art glorifies conquest. Reliefs show power frozen in stone, enemies kneeling, cities falling, order imposed. These images aren't just decoration, they are instruction. The message is unambiguous. Resistance is inefficient. And yet, beneath the brutality, knowledge continues. Libraries expand. Texts are collected obsessively. Scholars preserve myths, medical texts, astronomical records. The empire destroys selectively, but archives relentlessly. This contradiction defines Assyrian power. For ordinary people, survival means compliance. You follow rules. You pay tribute. You don't attract attention. Life continues inside narrow margins. At night, you sleep, knowing the system will not hesitate, but also knowing it will function tomorrow exactly as it did today. Fear enforces order, but fear also erodes loyalty. Resentment accumulates quietly. Control stretches resources thin. Empires built on force require constant exertion. When attention slips, fractures widen. The Assyrian machine is powerful, and machines, no matter how refined, eventually wear down. When power breaks, knowledge doesn't shatter with it, it scatters. You notice this first, not in politics, but in habits. Even as empires rise and fall, people keep counting the same way, measuring the same way, watching the sky the same way. Tools change hands, borders move, methods persist. This is one of Mesopotamia's quietest achievements. Ideas learn how to survive their creators. Astronomy continues not as poetry, but as discipline. The sky is still watched nightly, patiently. Stars are tracked, cycles logged, patterns refined, not because anyone is chasing wonder, but because timing matters, planting, rituals, omens, authority itself. You learn to trust the sky as a clock. There's a soft irony here. While kings claim divine favor, priests and scholars are learning to predict eclipses with unnerving accuracy. When the heavens behave mathematically, belief subtly shifts. Gods remain powerful, but predictable gods feel different. This sparks another scholarly tension historians still debate. Did Mesopotamian astronomy strengthen religion by making omens precise, or weaken it by revealing regularity beneath mystery? The tablets don't answer. They just keep counting. Mathematics deepens alongside this celestial patience. Base 6-0 calculations become second nature. Fractions, angles, conversions, none of it feels abstract anymore. You use it to divide land, measure canals, calculate wages. Numbers stop being tools and start becoming language. Here's a fringe tidbit hidden in plain sight. Some tablets show complex calculations written without explanation, implying mental math so fluent it didn't need justification. Mastery became invisible. Medicine evolves the same way. Illness is categorized. Symptoms are grouped. Treatments are recorded, compared, adjusted. Some remedies are ritual, others are empirical. No one separates the two cleanly. You care less about why something works than whether it does. Scholars compile lists, plants, minerals, procedures. Knowledge becomes cumulative. A healer doesn't start from scratch. They inherit methods refined by others, long gone. This inheritance is fragile but persistent. Libraries grow quietly. Clay tablets stack high, organized by topic. Someone, somewhere, decides preservation matters. That decision echoes forward. Even conquerors notice. New powers absorb Mesopotamia not just for land, but for expertise. Administrators adopt its record keeping. Builders copy its techniques. Thinkers inherit its frameworks. Ideas migrate more easily than people. You feel this continuity in small ways. A measurement standard that outlives a dynasty. A calendar structure that ignores regime change. A legal concept that survives translation. Violence rearranges who commands. Knowledge rearranges how life functions. At night, as political uncertainty hums beneath daily routine, you find comfort in repetition. The stars rise when expected, calculations still work, remedies still soothe. Civilization feels less fragile when its foundations aren't tied to a single ruler. And in this endurance, Mesopotamia quietly ensures it won't truly disappear. It will dissolve into influence. You begin to notice a pattern now. Empires don't really vanish, they rotate. Names change, centers shift, languages adjust. But the underlying machinery, the habits of rule, record, belief, and labor keeps reassembling itself in familiar shapes. It's less like starting over and more like rearranging furniture in the same room. This is when the Persians arrive, not as destroyers, but as absorbers. The Achaemenid Empire doesn't try to erase Mesopotamia, it studies it, it keeps the accountants, keeps the administrators, keeps the calendars, the measurements, the records. Power changes hands, but expertise stays seated. You feel the difference immediately. Rule becomes lighter in tone, even as it grows broader in reach. Local customs are tolerated. Local gods remain worshipped. Tribute is demanded. Yes, but chaos is discouraged. Stability becomes policy. Here's a scholarly phrase often used here: imperial pragmatism. Control works better when people recognize their own routines inside it. Roads expand dramatically. Communication speeds up. Messages move with purpose rather than hope. The world feels connected in a way it never quite did before. And for the first time, empire doesn't feel constantly strained. This isn't kindness, it's efficiency. Kings like Cyrus the Great understand something earlier rulers didn't fully grasp. You don't need to crush identity to command loyalty. You just need to sit above it. Law adapts again, not rigid like Babylon, not terrifying like Assyria. Flexible, layered, context-aware. Justice varies by region, but authority remains unmistakable. You live under rules that feel familiar, even if the ruler feels distant. That familiarity is powerful. Trade explodes. Goods move across vast distances with unprecedented regularity. Silver, textiles, spices, ideas all flowing through systems refined long before, now scaled beyond imagination. Mesopotamia becomes a crossroads rather than a center, and strangely that feels right. This land has always been about connection between rivers, between people, between past and future. Being absorbed into something larger doesn't erase its importance. It reframes it. Knowledge continues to circulate. Scholars still copy tablets. Priests still watch the sky. Healers still practice. The empire doesn't interfere because it doesn't need to. Control without disruption is the ultimate flex. You sense that something has stabilized, not permanently, but convincingly. For the first time in a long while, the system feels less brittle. And yet, even this isn't final, because no arrangement ever is. The wheel keeps turning. You don't notice the rivers changing at first. They still look like rivers. They still flow. They still flood. But the timing feels off. The water arrives a little earlier than expected, or later. It lingers where it used to pass quickly. It pulls back from channels that once stayed full. Small differences, easy to ignore. For generations, people here have learned to read water like a language. Depth, color, speed, each variation means something. So when those signals start contradicting memory, unease spreads quietly. Irrigation systems strain. Canals that worked for centuries need constant clearing. Salt creeps upward through soil, leaving pale scars on once dark fields. Crops still grow, but unevenly. Yields decline just enough to force adjustments. Adjustments cost energy. Some fields are abandoned. New ones are carved elsewhere. Populations shift subtly, family by family. No one calls it migration. It's just relocation. This is how ecology reshapes civilization without asking permission. There's an old comparison historians like to make. Mesopotamia was a machine that ran on water, and like any machine, it wore itself down, not dramatically, gradually. You feel it in the conversations. Less talk of expansion, more talk of maintenance, less pride in abundance, more pride in endurance. Rituals adapt again. Prayers shift tone from gratitude to appeal. Offerings increase in frequency, if not in size. The gods are asked to stabilize rather than bless. Here's a scholarly tension that never resolves cleanly. Did environmental stress cause political decline, or did political strain prevent effective environmental management? The evidence suggests a feedback loop. Each made the other worse. Human systems are good at responding to crises. They are less good at responding to slow change. Trade routes adjust. Some bypass the old heartland entirely. New centers rise along more reliable paths. Influence diffuses outward. Mesopotamia becomes less central, more foundational. You still live here. Life continues. But the sense of being at the center of the world softens. The world grows elsewhere too. This doesn't feel like loss. It feels like aging. The land that taught humanity how to stay put now teaches it something else, how to move on without forgetting. At night the rivers still murmur, but they sound older now, less urgent, as if reminding you that nothing, not even beginnings, last forever. What fades first isn't memory, it's attention. Mesopotamia doesn't vanish from the world. The world simply stops looking at it as closely. Power shifts west and east. New capitals glitter. New stories demand space. The land between the rivers keeps living, but it's no longer introduced as the beginning. It's treated as background. That's a strange position to occupy. You still wake, work, argue, celebrate. Markets still open, laws still function, temples still stand, repaired more often than rebuilt. The rhythms remain, but the spotlight moves on. And with the spotlight gone, something gentler happens. Innovation stops being forced. Without the pressure to lead, to dominate, to prove relevance, daily life settles into continuity. Skills are passed down quietly. Knowledge is copied because it's useful, not because it's prestigious. Calendars tick on. Measurements remain steady. Stories are told without urgency. This is when influence becomes invisible. Scribes still train, though fewer. Astronomers still chart the sky, though with less royal backing. Healers still practice, guided by lists refined over centuries. No one announces these acts as history making. They don't need to. Here's a comparison that helps. Mesopotamia becomes like grammar in a language. You don't notice it while speaking, but without it, nothing makes sense. Legal concepts, administrative habits, timekeeping, structures, these are carried elsewhere, adopted, adapted, renamed. The source is forgotten, the function remains. You feel this when travelers pass through. They recognize systems without knowing where they came from. They follow rules that originated here, enforced elsewhere. They speak in units of time and value that once belonged to this land. Identity dissolves into utility. Religion changes again. The gods don't disappear, but their authority localizes. Belief becomes more personal, less political. Without imperial amplification, faith softens. It returns to households, to routines, to private reassurance. Power rarely likes this stage, but people often do. There's less pressure now, fewer grand demands. Life feels narrower, but lighter. You don't feel responsible for the world anymore, just for your corner of it. This is the quiet after significance, not defeat, not failure, completion, because beginnings don't need to stay central forever. They only need to work once. At night, you look at the rivers and realize something important. They were never meant to carry the entire future. They were meant to start it, and they did. By now, you can feel the shape of it, not a timeline, not a list of empires, a pattern. What began here was never meant to stay here. Between these rivers, humans learned something dangerous and useful at the same time that life could be organized, predicted, stored, corrected, and repeated. That chaos could be softened, if not defeated. That memory could be external. That power could be abstract. That belief could be structured. That time itself could be measured and owned. Once learned, none of that could be unlearned. So, when cities faded, the ideas didn't. When temples cracked, the habits stayed. When kings vanished, the systems they relied on quietly moved elsewhere. You see it clearly now. Every later civilization carries fingerprints from this place. Not names or gods, but assumptions. That laws should be written, that records should exist, that rulers need legitimacy, that trade needs trust, that time should be divided. That order is preferable to uncertainty. These assumptions feel natural to you because you inherited them, not because they're inevitable. Mesopotamia didn't invent humanity. It invented continuity. It taught people how to pass complexity forward. And here's the quiet truth most histories rush past. Nothing after this was truly simple again. Even collapse became organized. Even recovery followed patterns. Even forgetting required structure. This land didn't fail. It completed its role. You don't measure its success by what still stands, but by what no longer needs to. You don't need to remember its kings to live inside its logic. You don't need its temples to think in its terms. That's the strange victory of the first civilization. It disappears into everyone else. As the night deepens, this realization settles softly. History stops feeling loud. It stops feeling competitive. It feels cumulative. Layer upon layer. Choice upon choice. Humanity didn't rise here in a moment of brilliance. It drifted into itself, and that drift is still happening. Now let your breathing slow. You don't need to hold on to dates or names anymore. Let them loosen and fade, the way river marks fade from sand once the water passes. What remains is quieter than information. It's texture, rhythm, familiarity. Imagine the rivers again, not as borders or symbols, but as sound. Water moving without urgency, carrying silt, not meaning. doing what it has always done. People are sleeping nearby. Somewhere, someone is finishing a late task. Somewhere else, a lamp is being extinguished. The world continues, gently, without needing to announce itself. You don't have to remember everything you heard tonight for it to matter. Civilization doesn't work that way. It sinks in gradually, the way habits do, the way language does, the way understanding does when it isn't forced. Let your thoughts soften around the edges. You're not standing at the beginning of history anymore. You're resting inside its long echo, and it's safe to rest here.